The first reports came from the edge of Council space in the early hours of what would later be called Black Tuesday. Commander Beth Crawford was monitoring long-range communications from her post on Haven Station when every channel suddenly filled with panic and static. The voices that came through the speakers spoke in a dozen different alien languages, but they all said the same thing. The Devourers had arrived. Beth quickly routed the signals to Admiral Collins, who was already awake in his command center. The old admiral had not been sleeping well since the intelligence reports started coming in about the machine invasion. He listened to the frantic messages from Council worlds with a grim expression on his weathered face. "Sir, the Vorthak home fleet is reporting massive casualties," Beth told him as more reports flooded in. 3 of their battle stations have been completely destroyed. The attackers are described as geometric ships that seem to be made of living metal. Collins nodded, slowly. The descriptions matched what human scouts had observed during the failed probe attacks on Outer Rim colonies. The Devourers built their ships from the materials of conquered worlds, and each vessel was designed for maximum efficiency, rather than any sense of beauty or style. Across the galaxy, the proud civilizations that had exiled humanity were learning what terror truly meant. The crystalline hive watched in horror as their singing crystal cities were ground down into raw materials. The aquatic depth lords saw their ocean worlds drained dry to fuel the invaders' expansion. The ethereal consortium found their energy bodies meant nothing to machines that could process any form of matter. On the Vorthak capital world of Dominus Prime, Chairman Zethmore stood in his war room watching tactical displays that showed nothing but defeat. In 1 week, the mighty Vorthak Empire had lost more ships than in the previous century of expansion. The Devourer fleet moved through space like a swarm of hungry insects consuming everything in their path. "My lord, we have lost contact with the 4th Battle Group," reported General Caxeron. The massive warrior's voice shook with something that might have been fear. "The entire Helix Nebula has gone dark. Long-range sensors show nothing but empty space where 7 star systems used to be." Zethmore felt something he had not experienced in his long life. For the first time since he had taken power 50 years ago, he was truly afraid. The Empire had always been the strongest force in known space. Their weapons could crack planets, and their fleets could darken the stars around enemy worlds. But none of that mattered against an enemy that could convert entire solar systems into more ships and weapons. Meanwhile, in the Outer Rim, the human colonies were preparing for their own battles. Admiral Collins had moved the main fleet to defensive positions around the most important worlds, while Captain Maya Thompson led a strike force toward the edge of human space, where long-range sensors had detected approaching Devourer scouts. The HNS Defiance moved through the darkness between stars like a predator hunting prey. Maya's ship was built for this kind of warfare using technology that the Council had never imagined. Instead of the bright metals and energy weapons favored by civilized species, human ships were dark and angular with surfaces that bent light and sensors around them. "Captain, we have multiple contacts bearing 27 Mark IV, reported Lieutenant Tony Miller from his sensor station. "I count at least 12 Devourer vessels approaching the Kepler mining station." Maya studied the tactical display that showed the enemy ships as red dots moving in perfect formation toward the human mining facility. The station was home to 3,000 miners and their families who worked the asteroid fields for the rare metals that powered human technology. "All ships prepare for attack pattern Delta. Remember, these machines think in straight lines, so we are going to give them curves they cannot calculate." The human strike force dropped out of their hidden positions like wolves attacking a flock of sheep. But these sheep had teeth made of energy beams and hull plating that could absorb nuclear explosions. The first exchange of weapons fire lit up the space around Kepler Station with colors that had no names. Commander Tony Miller had transferred from communications to command of his own ship during the preparations for war. The HNS Resilient was smaller than Maya's flagship, but it had been built with the same adaptive technology that made human vessels so hard to fight. When Devourer energy beams struck his ship, the hull absorbed the energy and used it to power his weapons. "Sir, their targeting computers cannot lock onto us," reported his weapons officer, Ensign Lisa Garcia. She was young and had never been in a real battle, but her hands were steady on the weapon controls. "The dimensional shift drives are working perfectly." The dimensional drives were one of humanity's greatest discoveries during the exile years. By shifting slightly out of normal space, human ships could avoid enemy fire while still being able to attack. It was a technology that required constant adjustment and creative thinking to use properly. The rigid programming of Devourer ships could not adapt to such chaotic tactics. Back on Haven Station, Dr. Richard Hayes was watching the battle through long-range sensors while working on his most important project. The living metal that his team had discovered was now growing in specially designed tanks throughout the station. Each sample learned from the others, and together they were becoming something that might be able to fight the Devourers on equal terms. "Doctor, the metal is reacting to the battle data," reported Dr. Karen Walsh. Her red hair was tied back with a piece of wire, and her lab coat had stains from working with materials that did not exist in any textbook. "It seems to be analyzing Devourer technology and building countermeasures." Richard watched in amazement as the metal began forming structures that looked like weapons, but worked on principles he did not understand. When he tried to scan them with normal instruments, the readings made no sense. The metal was not just adaptive, it was creative in ways that conventional matter should never be able to achieve. The battle around Kepler Station lasted for 6 hours, and when it was over, the space around the mining facility was filled with the wreckage of both human and Devourer ships. But the important thing was that the station was still there, and its people were still alive. For the first time since the invasion began, someone had stopped the Devourers from taking what they wanted. News of the victory spread quickly through both human and council space. On Haven Station, Admiral Collins received a message that he had been expecting ever since the war began. It was from an old woman who had once stood with him before the Galactic Council and watched their people be sentenced to exile. Ambassador Lisa Carter was now 80 years old and lived quietly on a farming world at the edge of human space, but she still had contacts in the inner worlds, and some of them were finally ready to admit that the Council had made a terrible mistake 50 years ago. "Steve." The message came through official diplomatic channels for the first time since the exile. Lisa told him over the secure communication link. "They want to meet with human representatives to discuss what they call mutual cooperation against the Devourer threat." Collins laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Mutual cooperation? Is that what they are calling it when they come? Begging for help from the species they tried to exterminate." The messenger was Kretal of the Meridian Protectorate. "She says the Council leadership is finally ready to acknowledge that humanity might have something valuable to offer in this." Collins thought about all the years of struggle and hardship that his people had endured in the Outer Rim. He thought about the families that had died in the early years when human colonies had no defenses against pirates and cosmic storms. He thought about the children who had grown up never seeing a garden world or breathing natural atmosphere. But he also thought about Captain Morrison and Dr. Foster, and all the others who had never given up hope that someday humanity would return to take its rightful place among the stars. The Council had exiled them because they feared human unpredictability and violence. Now that same unpredictability might be the only thing that could save organic life in the galaxy. "Tell Kretal that we will meet with Council representatives," Collins said finally. "But the meeting will take place on neutral ground and the terms will be set by human negotiators. If they want our help, they will ask for it properly." Lisa smiled for the first time in months. She remembered the young fleet officer who had helped evacuate human colonies 50 years ago. That man had grown into someone who could bargain with the aliens who had tried to destroy his people. "I will arrange the meeting, Steve, and Steve, remember that we are not the same species that they exiled. 50 years in the Outer Rim has changed us in ways they cannot imagine." As the communication ended, Collins looked out at the stars that surrounded Haven Station. Somewhere in that darkness, the Devourer fleets were consuming entire civilizations, while building more ships for their assault on the galactic core. The proud species that had once called humanity too dangerous were learning what real danger looked like. But humanity was ready for this war in ways that no other species could be. They had learned to survive and adapt and create in the harshest environment in the galaxy. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council building on Nexus Prime. The massive chamber stretched high above him with walls that seemed to touch the stars themselves. 12 different alien species sat in their floating seats arranged in a perfect circle around the center stage. Their eyes all looked down at Jake and the small group of humans who waited for their final judgment. The air felt heavy and cold. Jake could hear his own heartbeat as he waited for Council Chairman Zethmore to speak. The tall gray alien had skin like old leather and eyes that glowed with a soft blue light. Behind those eyes, Jake saw something that made his stomach turn. It was not anger or fear, it was disgust. Ambassador Lisa Carter stepped forward. She was a smart woman who had spent 20 years trying to make peace between humans and the other species. Her voice was calm and strong as she spoke to the council. Honored members, we have come here today to ask for understanding. Humans are not the monsters you think we are. We are explorers and builders. We want to be part of this great galactic family. The Vorthak representative made a sound that was part laugh and part growl. His massive body shifted in his chair as he leaned forward to look at the humans below. You speak of family human, but your actions tell a different story. In the past 50 years, your species has started 3 wars with peaceful neighbors. You have taken resources that did not belong to you. You have built weapons that can crack planets in half. How can we trust beings who solve every problem with violence? Jake felt his jaw tighten. The wars the alien spoke of were not as simple as he made them sound. The first war happened when human colonists were attacked by raiders. The second started when alien pirates took human children as slaves. The third began when the Helix Consortium tried to steal human technology. Each time humans had tried to talk first, but when talking failed, they fought back hard. Lisa Carter knew this too, but she kept her voice level as she replied. Every species in this council has fought wars. The Vorthak Empire was built on the bones of conquered worlds. The crystalline hive consumed entire star systems before they learned to live in peace. We ask only for the same chance to grow and learn that you gave them. A new voice spoke from across the circle. It belonged to Dilavex of the Ethereal Consortium. Her body was made of pure energy contained in a glowing suit that let her interact with solid matter. When she spoke, her voice sounded like wind chimes in a storm. The difference, dear humans, is that those species learned to control themselves before they became too dangerous. Your people spread across space like a disease. You change everything you touch. You turn peaceful worlds into fortress planets. You make weapons from mining tools and warships from cargo vessels. You cannot help but make everything around you into something violent. Jake wanted to shout back at her, but he knew it would only prove her point. Instead, he took a deep breath and stepped forward to stand next to Lisa. We make tools and weapons because the galaxy is not a safe place. Every human colony has been attacked at least once by pirates or raiders or worse things that live in dark space. We fight because we have to fight. We build walls because without walls our children die. The council members looked at each other with expressions that Jake could not read. Some seemed sad while others looked angry. A few appeared to be afraid. After a long moment, Chairman Zethmore stood up from his chair. His voice filled the great hall when he spoke. The vote has already been taken, Captain Morrison. We did not bring you here to change our minds. We brought you here to tell you our decision with honor rather than sending it through official channels. The Galactic Council has voted to remove humanity from civilized space. You have 6 months to gather your people and leave. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He had known this might happen, but hearing it spoken out loud made it real in a way that hurt deep in his chest. Lisa Carter went pale, but she did not back down. Where do you expect us to go? Our people have homes on 200 worlds. We have families and businesses and entire lives built in council space. You will go to the outer rim, Zethmore replied. His voice had no emotion in it at all. Beyond the edge of civilized space, there are empty systems and dead worlds. You can build whatever kind of society you want out there. Just build it far away from the rest of us. Jake knew the outer rim well. Every spacer did. It was the name they gave to the dark edge of the galaxy where stars were far apart and planets were mostly rock and ice. Nothing valuable had ever been found there. No one went there unless they were running from something or looking for a place to die quietly. That is not exile, Jake said. His voice was getting louder despite his efforts to stay calm. That is a death sentence. The outer rim has no trade routes and no resources. Our colonies will die slowly without support from the inner worlds. That is not our concern, the Vorthak representative said. You should have thought of that before you proved you could not live in peace with civilized beings. Lisa Carter made one last attempt to change their minds. Please reconsider. Humanity has much to offer this galaxy. Our scientists have made discoveries that benefit everyone. Our doctors have cured diseases that plagued other species for centuries. Our engineers have built stations that protect entire systems from cosmic storms. And your warriors have built weapons that could destroy those same systems, Nyla Vex replied. We have seen what happens when humans decide they want something. We have seen how you fight. We cannot risk our children's future on the hope that you will become better than you are. The judgment was final. Jake could see it in their faces, and hear it in their voices. Nothing he or Lisa could say would change what was about to happen. The most powerful alliance in the galaxy had decided that humans were too dangerous to live among civilized species. Chairman Zethmore raised his hand and the Great Hall fell silent. Captain Morrison, you have 6 standard months to remove all human presence from Council space. Any human found within our borders after that time will be considered an enemy of galactic peace. This session is ended. The floating chairs began to rise as the council members prepared to leave. Jake watched them go with a mixture of anger and sadness. These aliens who called themselves civilized were about to force millions of innocent people from their homes. They spoke of peace while preparing to commit what could only be called genocide. But Jake Morrison was a starship captain and he had work to do. Somewhere out there, Admiral Steve Collins was waiting for news of this meeting. When Jake told him what had happened, Collins would begin the largest evacuation in human history. They had 6 months to save their entire species. As Jake and Lisa walked out of the Great Hall, they both knew their old lives were over. Everything would change now. The only question was whether humanity would survive what came next. Dr. Richard Hayes looked out through the thick glass window of his laboratory at the red dwarf star that hung in the sky above Haven Colony. 50 years had passed since the Great Exile began, and that weak sun had become as familiar to him as Earth's bright yellow star had been to his father. The Outer Rim was a hard place to live, but it had taught humanity lessons they could never have learned in the comfortable worlds of Council space. Richard turned back to his work table where pieces of strange metal lay scattered like puzzle parts. The metal was black as deep space, but it seemed to move and shift when no one was looking directly at it. His team had found it in the core of a dead planet 3 systems away. When they brought it back to Haven, it had started doing things that should have been impossible. Dr. Hayes, the test results are ready, called out his assistant Dr. Karen Walsh from across the lab. She was young and brilliant with red hair that always seemed to escape from whatever she used to tie it back. Karen had been born in the Outer Rim and had never seen the inner worlds, but she understood science better than researchers who had studied at the best council universities. Richard walked over to look at the data on her screen. What he saw made his heart beat faster. The metal sample had absorbed energy from their testing equipment and somehow changed its own atomic structure. It was learning and adapting like a living thing. This changes everything, Karen. If we can figure out how this metal works, we can build ships that repair themselves. We can make tools that improve themselves with use. This could be the breakthrough we have been looking for. Karen nodded, but her expression was serious. Doctor, there is something else you need to see. The long-range sensors picked up some strange signals from beyond the galactic edge. Communications thinks they might be artificial, but they are not, using any council frequencies. Richard felt a chill run down his spine. In the 50 years since exile, humanity had grown used to being alone in the Outer Rim. Sometimes council ships would pass by on their way to nowhere important, but they never stopped to talk. The idea that something else might be out there was both exciting and terrifying. Across the colony on the military base, Captain Maya Thompson was having similar thoughts as she looked at the data her intelligence team had gathered. Maya commanded the HNS Defiance, which was the first warship built entirely in the Outer Rim, using resources and technology that the Council had never seen. The ship looked nothing like the sleek vessels that protected Council space. It was angular and dark with surfaces that seemed to bend light around them. Captain, the signals are definitely artificial, reported her communications officer, Lieutenant Tony Miller. He was a serious young man who had grown up on a mining station and knew how to read scanner data better than anyone in the fleet. They are coming from the direction of the Andromeda Galaxy, and they are getting stronger every day. Maya studied the readings on her command screen. The signals had a pattern to them that reminded her of the way machines talk to each other. But these signals were more complex than anything humanity had ever built. Whatever was sending them had technology that was far beyond even Council science. Keep monitoring the signals, Tony. If they change or if anything starts coming our way, I want to know immediately. And send a copy of all this data to Admiral Collins on the command station. Admiral Steve Collins was older now with gray hair and lines around his eyes from 50 years of worry and hard decisions. He had been a young fleet commander when the exile began and had spent half his life building humanity's new home in the dark between the stars. The Outer Rim had no garden worlds or crystal cities, but humans had learned to make it their own. Collins studied the signal data that Captain Thompson had sent him while he walked through the corridors of Haven Station. The station was built inside a hollow asteroid, and its walls were lined with metal that his engineers had learned to grow rather than mine. Everything about human technology had changed during the exile. Cut off from Council science and trade, humans had been forced to find new ways to solve old problems. "Admiral, we have a priority message coming in from the core worlds," announced his aide, Commander Paul Adams. Paul was Collins's nephew and had inherited the family talent for seeing trouble before it arrived. His face was pale as he handed the message pad to Collins. The message was from someone Collins had not heard from in decades. Ambassador Lisa Carter was now an old woman living quietly in the outer colonies, but she still had contacts in Council space who sometimes sent her news from the inner worlds. This message was different, though. It was not news. It was a warning. Collins read the message twice before he fully understood what it meant. According to Lisa's source, someone called Cretal from the Meridian species had made secret contact with human intelligence. The message was simple but terrifying. The Council was facing an invasion from something they called the Devourers. These were machines that came from beyond the galaxy and turned entire star systems into raw materials for building more machines. What made the message even more frightening was the last part. 3 separate Devourer scout fleets had tried to probe human colonies in the Outer Rim. All 3 had been destroyed by human defenses using technology the Council had never seen. Collins immediately called an emergency meeting of the Human Leadership Council. Within hours, the most important people in the Outer Rim colonies were gathered in the main conference room of Haven Station. The room was simple and functional like everything else humans had built during their exile. There were no decorations or comfortable seats, just a large table and chairs that had been made from asteroid metal and recycled ship parts. Captain Jake Morrison was there representing the diplomatic corps. He was older now, but still sharp, and his eyes still held the anger from that day 50 years ago, when the Council had voted to exile his people. Dr. Amanda Foster sat next to him. She had been in charge of downloading scientific data during the evacuation and had spent 5 decades turning that stolen knowledge into new discoveries. "The situation is more serious than any threat we have faced since the exile began," Collins told the group. He shared the intelligence about the Devourers and the failed attacks on human colonies. "We always knew that someday someone would notice what we have been building out here. It appears that day has come." Dr. Foster leaned forward in her chair. She had gray hair now, but her mind was as sharp as ever. "Admiral, the technology we have developed during our exile is not just different from Council science. In many ways, it is better. We have had to be creative and adaptive in ways that comfortable civilizations never need to be." Captain Morrison nodded his agreement. "The Council exiled us because they thought we were too dangerous and unpredictable. They wanted a galaxy where everything followed rules and stayed peaceful. Now something is coming that does not care about their rules, and they do not know how to fight it." Maya Thompson had arrived from her ship just in time to hear Morrison's comment. She took a seat at the table and added her own thoughts. "Captain, our scouts have been tracking those signals for weeks now. Whatever is sending them is big, and it is coming this way. The Council fleets are designed to fight other civilized species in organized battles. These Devourers sound like something completely different." Collins stood up and walked to the large window that looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there in the darkness between galaxies, an enemy was approaching that could destroy everything humans had built. But Collins was not afraid. 50 years of survival in the Outer Rim had taught humanity lessons that no other species had ever needed to learn. "We have been preparing for this our whole lives without knowing it," he said to the group. "Every challenge we have faced in the Outer Rim has made us stronger and more creative. We have built ships that can fight in ways no council captain would understand. We have weapons that adapt to their targets and defenses that learn from every attack." Dr. Richard Hayes was not at the meeting, but back in his laboratory, he was making a discovery that would change everything. The living metal his team had found was not just adaptive, it was intelligent in a way that normal matter could never be. When he introduced it to samples of Devourer technology that had been recovered from the failed attack, something incredible happened. The metal began to change and grow. It learned the patterns of the machine invaders and started building defenses against them. Within hours, it had created structures that could disrupt Devourer communications and weapons that could turn their own technology against them. Karen Walsh watched in amazement as the metal continued to evolve. "Doctor, this is not just a new material. This is a new form of life. It thinks and learns and grows stronger with every challenge." Richard smiled for the first time in weeks. Humanity had been exiled to the dark edge of the galaxy 50 years ago. The Council had wanted them gone because they were too dangerous and unpredictable. Now those very qualities might be the only thing that could save not just humanity but all organic life in the galaxy. The Devourers were coming, and they would find that the species the Council had tried to eliminate was ready for them. The meeting took place on Crossroads Station, which had been neutral ground between human and Council space for 20 years. The station was built inside a massive asteroid that had been hollowed out and filled with conference rooms and diplomatic facilities. It was one of the few places where humans and aliens could meet without either side claiming territorial advantage. Admiral Jake Morrison arrived first with a small delegation of human officials and military advisors. He was older now, with gray hair and scars on his hands from 50 years of hard living in the Outer Rim, but his eyes still burned with the same intensity that had faced down the Council during the original exile hearings. The Council delegation arrived 2 hours later, led by Nyla Vex of the Ethereal Consortium. She was accompanied by representatives from 6 different species, including General Caxron of the Vorthak Empire and a crystalline hive speaker whose song voice made the air shimmer when she spoke. The first meeting did not go well. Council representatives spoke as if they were still the dominant power in the galaxy, and humans were lucky to be included in their war effort. They offered to share some technology in exchange for human assistance, but made it clear they expected to remain in command of all joint operations. "You are asking us to sacrifice our people and ships for a war that you cannot win," Morrison told them bluntly. "The Devourers have destroyed half your fleets in 2 months. Your homeworlds are being evacuated and your colonies are going dark one by one. We are not junior partners in this alliance. We are your only hope for survival." Nyla Vex pulsed with angry colors as she replied, "Your arrogance is astounding, Admiral Morrison. Humanity was exiled from civilized space because you could not control your violent impulses. Now you demand to lead species that have maintained peace for thousands of years." Morrison stood up from the conference table and looked directly at the energy being who had voted to exile his people 50 years ago. "Your peace was built on keeping dangerous species like humans away from your perfect worlds. Now something truly dangerous has arrived, and your perfect peace means nothing. The Devourers do not care about your diplomatic protocols or your ancient treaties." The argument might have continued for hours if not for the emergency alert that suddenly filled the station's communication systems. Long-range sensors had detected a massive Devourer fleet moving toward the Terran sector where Earth's ruins still orbited their dying sun. The enemy formation included something new that intelligence analysts were calling a world ship. Captain Maya Thompson was monitoring the situation from her command ship when the scale of the threat became clear. The world ship was the size of a small moon, and it was accompanied by over 1,000 smaller vessels. If it reached the inner systems, it would consume everything in its path, including several heavily populated council worlds. "Admiral Morrison, this is Captain Thompson," she broadcast on the emergency channel. "Long-range scans show the world ship is heading directly for the Sol system. They are not just attacking random targets anymore. They know where we came from, and they are going after our origins. Morrison received the message while the council delegation was still arguing about command structures and territorial rights. The news changed everything in an instant. This was no longer about negotiating terms or sharing technology. The Devourers had made it personal. "The discussions are over," Morrison announced to the assembled aliens. "In 6 hours, that world ship will begin converting the Sol system into raw materials. If you want our help in this war, you will accept our terms immediately. Human forces will take command of all anti-Devourer operations, and council fleets will follow our tactical doctrine." General Caxron rose to his full, intimidating height and spoke in a voice like thunder. "No human will give orders to Vorthak warriors. We have fought wars since before your species learned to make fire." Morrison smiled, but his expression was not friendly. "General, your warriors have been losing this war since it started. Human forces have not lost a single engagement against the Devourers. You can follow our lead, or you can watch your empire die. Choose quickly, because we are leaving for Sol with or without you." The debate that followed was heated and emotional. Species that had dominated the galaxy for millennia struggled with the idea of taking orders from creatures they had considered barely civilized, but the tactical displays showing the approaching world ship made their choice clear. Pride was less important than survival. Dr. Brian Martinez was working frantically in his laboratory aboard the human flagship HNS Liberation when the joint fleet assembled for the journey to Sol. He had been developing what he called the Chaos Protocol for months, but had never been able to test it in actual combat. The system was designed to introduce controlled randomness into human technology, making it impossible for rigid AI systems to predict or counter. "Doctor, the fleet is preparing to jump to hyperspace," his assistant informed him. "Admiral Morrison wants to know if the Chaos Protocol will be ready for deployment." Brian looked at the complex equations that covered every surface in his lab. The math was beautiful in its complexity, but he knew that beauty meant nothing if it did not work when lives depended on it. "Tell the Admiral that we will find out together. This is not the kind of system you can test in simulation." The combined human and council fleet that jumped toward the Sol system was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships, dark and angular, flew alongside the bright vessels of a dozen alien species. The formation looked chaotic to outside observers, but every ship knew its role in the battle plan that Morrison and his staff had developed. Captain Beth Crawford commanded the reconnaissance wing, which included both human scouts and alien sensor ships. Her mixed crew had worked together for only a few days, but they had learned to combine their different technologies and techniques into something more effective than either could achieve alone. The avian pilot Hawkra had initially refused to take orders from humans, but had changed her attitude after seeing how human tactics had succeeded where traditional council strategies had failed. Her sharp eyes could spot enemy formations that electronic sensors missed, while human intuition could predict devourer movements that followed no logical pattern. "Captain, we are approaching the Sol system," reported her navigation officer, Lieutenant Paul Adams. "Long-range sensors are showing massive energy readings from the direction of Earth's orbit." Crawford studied the tactical display with a feeling of dread growing in her stomach. The world ship had reached Earth 6 hours ago and was already beginning the process of breaking down the dead planet for raw materials. Streams of converted matter flowed from the surface into the massive vessel's construction bays, where new Devourer ships were being assembled at an incredible rate. The battle that followed would be remembered as the turning point in the Devourer War. Human ships used their dimensional drives to strike at targets that should have been impossible to reach, while council vessels provided the heavy firepower needed to damage the world ship's massive hull. The combination of human innovation and alien firepower created tactical possibilities that neither side could have achieved alone. Commander Tony Miller led a squadron of mixed human and Vorthak ships in a desperate assault on the world ship's primary construction bay. His ship, the HNS Resilient, had been upgraded with Vorthak shield technology that could absorb incredible amounts of damage, while his Vorthak wingman, General Torval, provided covering fire with weapons that could crack moons. "Commander, the Chaos Protocol is working," reported his weapons officer as Devourer targeting systems failed to lock onto their constantly shifting formation. "Their computers cannot predict our attack patterns." But the world ship was too large and too well defended for conventional attacks to succeed. As the battle raged around Earth's ruins, Admiral Morrison made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He ordered the use of humanity's most dangerous weapon. The quantum torpedo had been developed in secret during the exile years using principles that Council science considered impossible. When it detonated against the world ship's core, the explosion created a cascade reaction that tore through the massive vessel like lightning through a storm cloud. The world ship died in a burst of light that could be seen from 100 light years away. But its death scream was heard by every devourer ship in the galaxy, and they all turned toward the source of that signal. The real war was just beginning, and now the machines knew exactly where to find their most dangerous enemies. As the combined fleet regrouped in the wreckage of the Sol system, Morrison received a message from Council headquarters on Nexus Prime. Chairman Zethmore himself was requesting a direct communication link. When the alien's face appeared on Morrison's screen, the human admiral could see something there that had not been present 50 years ago. It was respect. Admiral Morrison, the Council formally recognizes human authority over anti-devourer operations, Zethmore said without preamble. We have prepared reparations for the exile period and are ready to discuss humanity's full reinstatement in galactic civilization. Morrison looked at the alien who had condemned his people to exile and death 50 years ago. The irony was not lost on him that the same unpredictability and violence that had frightened the Council was now their only hope for survival. The Omega Prime emerged from dark space like a nightmare made real. The massive Devourer command ship was larger than most moons, and its surface crawled with construction bays that built new vessels even as it traveled toward the galactic core. Behind it came an armada of 10,000 ships, each one a perfect killing machine designed for maximum efficiency. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the human flagship HNS Liberation, watching the sensor displays that showed the approaching enemy fleet. Every tactical computer in the combined human and Council forces was running calculations, but the numbers all said the same thing. The defenders were outnumbered 50-1, and conventional tactics would result in total annihilation. Admiral, long-range sensors show the main Devourer fleet will reach Prime Genesis in 72 hours. Reported Captain Beth Crawford from her position at the sensor station. Council evacuation ships are still trying to move civilian populations from the core worlds, but there is not enough time. Morrison nodded grimly as he studied the tactical situation. Prime Genesis was the ancient capital world of galactic civilization, and home to over 2 billion beings from a dozen different species. If it fell, then organized resistance to the Devourers would effectively end. The machines would have all the time they needed to convert the rest of the galaxy into raw materials. Dr. Karen Walsh had been working for 3 days straight in the science labs trying to find a weakness in the Omega Prime's defenses. The world ship's hull was made of living metal, similar to what human scientists had discovered but far more advanced. It could repair damage almost instantly and adapt to new weapons after only a few attacks. Admiral, I think I have found something, Karen announced over the communication system. Her voice was hoarse from exhaustion but filled with excitement. The Omega Prime's power source is not just a fusion reactor. It is a quantum singularity that connects to the entire Devourer network. If we could disrupt that connection, it might shut down their whole fleet. Morrison felt a spark of hope for the first time in days. What would it take to reach the singularity, and how long would we have once we got inside? The quantum core is located at the center of the world ship, protected by thousands of automated defenses, Karen replied. A strike team would need to fight their way through approximately 50 kilometers of hostile territory, and once they reached the core, they would have maybe 10 minutes before the Devourers adapted their security systems. It was a desperate plan with almost no chance of success, but Morrison could not see any alternative. The combined fleet might be able to damage the Omega Prime's outer hull, but they could never penetrate deep enough to reach the quantum core. Only a small team moving fast and using unpredictable tactics would have any hope of getting inside. Commander Paul Adams volunteered to lead the strike team before Morrison had even finished explaining the mission. Paul was young and had grown up during the exile years when humans learned that sometimes impossible missions were the only ones worth attempting. His team would include volunteers from 6 different species, each contributing unique abilities to the desperate assault. Sir, I want Captain Maya Thompson to command the space battle while the strike team is inside the world ship, Paul requested. Her understanding of three-dimensional tactics and adaptive strategy is better than anyone else in the fleet. Morrison agreed, and within 6 hours, the most desperate mission in galactic history was ready to begin. The strike team would use a modified human assault ship to penetrate the Omega Prime's defenses while the main fleet kept the enemy armada busy. It was the kind of plan that would have been called insane during peacetime, but these were not peaceful times. Maya Thompson took command of the fleet with mixed feelings. She had trained for this kind of battle her entire career, but had never expected to be fighting for the survival of all organic life in the galaxy. Her flagship, the HNS Defiance, had been upgraded with the best technology from both human and council sources, creating a vessel that was unlike anything that had ever flown. The final battle began in the space around Prime Genesis as the Devourer Armada encountered the desperate defenders. Council ships formed the main battle line using their heavy weapons to engage the larger enemy vessels, while human ships used hit-and-run tactics to disrupt the machine formations. All ships prepare for attack pattern Omega, Maya broadcast on the Fleet Communication Channel. Remember, we are not trying to win this battle. We are trying to buy time for the strike team to reach their objective. Lieutenant Tony Miller commanded one of the escort vessels protecting the assault ship as it approached the Omega Prime. His ship, the HNS Resilient, had been modified with experimental stealth technology that made it nearly invisible to Devourer sensors. But stealth would only help for so long once they entered the world ship's defensive perimeter. The assault ship Phoenix carried 12 of the most skilled warriors and scientists from across known space. Commander Adams led the team with Dr. Lisa Garcia serving as his technical specialist. The Meridian operative Kretal used her phase-shifting abilities to scout ahead, while Vorthak warrior Torval provided heavy firepower support. Getting inside, the Omega Prime proved easier than expected, because the Devourers had never encountered an attack on their command ship before. Their defensive programming was designed to protect against external threats, not small teams fighting their way through internal corridors. But once the strike team was inside, the real battle began. The interior of the world ship was like a mechanical city with corridors that stretched for kilometers and chambers large enough to hold battleships. Everything was built for function rather than beauty, with surfaces that gleamed with alien metals and conduits that pulsed with energy streams. The air itself seemed hostile as it carried the sound of a million machines working in perfect synchronization. "Commander, we have reached the first checkpoint," reported Kretal as she materialized from her phase state. "The quantum core is 15 kilometers deeper, but there are automated defenses in every corridor between here and there." The team fought their way through security systems that adapted and learned from every attack. Energy barriers that could slice through starship hulls blocked their path while combat robots emerged from hidden alcoves to hunt them down. Each obstacle required creative solutions that conventional military doctrine could never have provided. Dr. Garcia proved essential to their progress as she hacked into Devourer control systems using techniques that combined human intuition with alien logic. Her modified scanner could read machine code in real time, and her portable computer could introduce chaos algorithms that confused the enemy's artificial intelligence. "Paul, the Devourers are starting to adapt to our intrusion," she warned as security responses became faster and more aggressive. "We probably have 20 minutes before they lock down the entire internal network." 20 kilometers above them, Maya Thompson was fighting the space battle of her career as the combined fleet held off the Devourer Armada. Human ships used their dimensional drives to appear and disappear like ghosts, while Council vessels traded heavy fire with enemy battlecruisers. The space around Prime Genesis was filled with explosions and energy beams as thousands of ships clashed in desperate combat. "Captain, the Omega Prime is beginning to turn toward the planet," reported her tactical officer. "If it reaches orbit, it can begin conversion operations while still fighting our fleet." Maya knew that could not be allowed to happen. Prime Genesis held the largest civilian population in known space, and conversion would mean the death of billions of innocent beings. She ordered her ship directly toward the world ship's main weapon array in a desperate attempt to disable its planet-killing capability. Inside, the Omega Prime Commander Adams and his team had finally reached the quantum core chamber. The room was vast and filled with machinery that hurt to look at directly. At the center, a sphere of pure energy hung suspended in a web of control systems that managed the power flow to the entire Devourer network. "This is it," Dr. Garcia announced as she began connecting her equipment to the quantum core's interface systems. "I can introduce the Chaos Protocol directly into their network, but once I start, they will know exactly what we are doing." Adams looked around at the faces of his team members. They had traveled across the galaxy fighting impossible odds to reach this moment. Some of them would not survive the next few minutes, but all of them understood what was at stake. "Do it, Lisa. Give these machines a dose of human unpredictability." The Chaos Protocol flowed into the Devourer network like a virus designed to destroy order itself. The rigid programming that controlled millions of machine minds suddenly encountered pure randomness that could not be calculated or predicted. Across the galaxy, Devourer ships began to malfunction as their artificial intelligence systems tried to process the impossible. The explosion that destroyed the Omega Prime could be seen from neighboring star systems. But more importantly, the cascade of chaotic energy that flowed through the Devourer network caused the entire machine collective to shut down in self-defense. Without their central coordination, the individual ships became nothing more than drifting, metal waiting to be salvaged. Commander Adams did not survive to see the victory he had made possible.